Give grace to all who exercise authority in our Commonwealth, that peace and happiness, truth and justice, religion and piety may be established among us. Especially we pray for the governor of our islands, the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, official members, and ministers of cabinet, and members of the Legislative Assembly, that we may be enabled faithfully to perform the responsible duties of our high office. All this we ask for thy great name's sake. Let us say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon us and give us peace, now and always. Amen.
You may be seated.
Reading by the Honourable Speaker, messages and announcements.
I have received apologies from the Leader of the Opposition. Before we move on to the next item, I am also affording members the opportunity, if they so desire, to express their feelings or sentiments or memories to Hurricane Ivan. So at this time, I would ask if you would take maximum 2 to 3 minutes to make your expressions heard if that is your desire. And please let us not play cat and mouse and wait on each other, because thank you very much for the excellent lead. Honourable Premier, please proceed.
Madam Speaker, today is the 10th anniversary of what is without doubt the most devastating natural disaster to ever hit these islands. And I think all of us are very conscious of the need to be thankful for having survived that event. The Cayman Islands lost 2 souls as a direct result of the hurricane, but countless others died in the aftermath of the hurricane. Persons who were ill, persons who were aged. I don't know if we can ever accurately pinpoint the number of persons whose demise was hastened as a result of Hurricane Ivan. But we must also be thankful, and I believe indeed proud of the efforts to ensure that all of us who remained survived the storm. I always remember, and will always remember and reflect upon the feeling that we were one big family, all connected to each other in the run-up to the storm, but particularly in the aftermath of the storm, when many of us who had much were reduced to the same level as those who had little. And the way the country pulled together, the love and fellowship which was demonstrated by persons from all walks of life and of all nationalities who had called this place home. That is something, one of the most positive things I think any of us can take away from Hurricane Ivan. Madam Speaker, yesterday I opened a symposium on Ivan at the Westin, and there were not only persons in Cayman who had experience with Ivan and the preparation for national disasters, but persons from the region who are experts in disaster management. And as I sat there before the opening ceremony and saw the slideshow and saw photographs of what Ivan had done, my heart started pounding, and that old familiar panic came upon me, it, it brought back a time which all of us would wish to forget, but I don't think any of us who survived it will ever forget. And as I reflected upon how far we've come since then, not just the rebuilding of the island, because I think few countries in the world would have been able to put it back together as swiftly as we did, and to have rebuilt even stronger than we were before. But as I reflected upon what has transpired in terms of planning for disaster management and the advent of HMCI, Hazard Management Cayman Islands, which was one of the work products of the administration, which I had the honor to be part of, the first PPM administration from 2005 to 2009, and the development of not just the legislation, which is now in place, but also the creation of the whole hazard management unit, and the tremendous strides we have made in understanding and appreciating that planning for a hurricane or any natural disaster is not something that we can just do a month or two before the season starts, but it's something that has to be year-round. And the advent of the new technology, in particular, the implementation of the acquisition and implementation of the Doppler radar system, which is giving us advance warning of such events, I think we can be proud as a nation of how far we've come. And as one of the regional directors said in his opening remarks yesterday, Cayman really is a model for the region in how you, not just how you deal with natural disasters, but the systems that we've put in place and our constant effort to improve upon what we have. And so, Madam Speaker, I am pleased this morning to be able to offer these few words to give God thanks for his mercies, having spared us. Well, I shouldn't say having spared us from another hurricane season, but having spared us from another serious storm since Ivan. And to say that I am grateful for all those who work so hard to make Cayman a safer place. I am grateful for a people that are so conscious of the need to prepare, and so grateful for a people who demonstrated in the aftermath of Ivan that regardless of where we come from, with 135, 140 different nationalities here, that we could work together in love and friendship and fellowship to rebuild this country again to be the country it now is, the envy of much of the world. And so, Madam Speaker, I pause with the rest of the nation today to reflect upon and to give God thanks for where we are, and to remember always the lessons of Hurricane Ivan.
Recognized member from East End.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I too wish to recognize this 10th anniversary of the passage of Ivan. I think, like the Premier said, I believe this was the biggest natural disaster this country had ever faced in over 70 years, which was 1932 hurricane. Madam Speaker, I believe that East End, this district that I have represented since 2000, was hit worse than any place else. There were many heroes, people who sacrificed their lives to save other people's lives in the middle of that hurricane. Their recognition, albeit late, but now here. There were people who worked so well together. It just showed us how resilient we are, the aftermath of that hurricane, and how much we came to each other's aid following that. I recall quite vividly leaving my home in Savannah at 7 o'clock that morning, 6, 7 that morning, and not reaching East End until 12 o'clock that day. A 20-minute drive turned into 5 hours. Madam Speaker, there was so much to be done. Entering East End, and after a few days recognizing that 80% of that district had been damaged, with 20% totally destroyed. And I know that comes as a surprise to many of us because not many people came to East End, including the government. So whilst I recognize the people who were heroes during that storm, I think I should likewise recognize those who came to the aid of the people of East End in the form of the Oldie family. She has never been the matriarch of that family has never been recognized publicly for the contribution that was made. Millions and millions of dollars was poured into that community from that one family. So much so that government did not even have to come to East End. That was what the people of East End, that is what they will always remember, the Oldie family coming to their aid. And I am eternally grateful for that family for having contributed so much. Madam Speaker, you were there. You even helped distribute food with us because of the lack of damage in Cayman, and you came to the aid of the people of East End as well. The fact that we are 10 years late in recognizing many people may be somewhat disrespectful, but at least it is here. This evening we will be having a prayer meeting in the middle of East End. Pastor Marquis is spearheading that. And we will be showing a lot of the pictures. The Premier spoke of the symposium that is being held. One of the things people don't know is that we have, I guess, miles of footage, of video. My cousin and your good friend, Madam Speaker, Darrell, took a video of East End the day before Ivan. 2 days or something like that before Ivan. Then we took a video the day of that we got out the Monday morning. And then we took videos leading up to during the complete restoration process. Madam Speaker, today I'm using those photos to remind the people of East End of what we went through and to show them the resilience that is still in them as Caymanians that we all know we have. I keep saying, people see our glory, they don't know our story. That's when the story of the Caymanian came together and we worked together as one to restore what we call home. And I am so proud of my people for that. Unfortunately, I didn't get any requests from those who were organizing the symposium for any material out of East End. We have some 10,000 pictures of East End. We have miles of video amateur footage. Madam Speaker, I think we can thank God for sparing our lives, even though we lost 2. I'll never forget when they said we had disappeared off the radar. That was a common theme. And to reemerge, and I remember the first parliament, the first meeting of this legislature following Ivan, when I talked about how I was modeling the Cayman Islands off of the mythical bird, the phoenix. We shall rise from the ashes. And oh, did we rise from the ashes. Today, you go through East End, and the only thing that reminds you that there was a storm are the three walls that I built. And one house down at High Rock. Madam Speaker, no electricity for 3 months, no water for months, and us having to struggle even to get ice. Those were the days when we all had to band together. But we rose from it. And we are better off as a result of Ivan. And I hope this evening that the people come out, not only to recognize what we went through, but to give thanks for what did not happen to us, and to give thanks for being spared for so many years hence, and to look to the future, and to resolve to do the same thing if we ever find ourselves in this situation again. Madam Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity, and I want the people of this country to remember what we did then, so we don't need a natural disaster to do it in the future, and we can live as one people. Madam Speaker, that goes for all that is here, because I remember after the hurricane too, there were so many other people that called me and donated to the cause. Small though it may be, it was a donation. There were many, many people who sent us stuff, whether we could use it or not, and it was distributed to the people of the District of East End. Madam Speaker, I thank all of those people publicly now and wish them well for the future, and look forward to us all working together as we did then for the future betterment of this country. Thank you.
Recognize the Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to say a few words on the remembrance of Hurricane Ivan. Madam Speaker, in Cayman Brac, as you well know, what we always talked about was the 32 storm, and we heard about it from our parents and our loved ones. Hurricane Ivan has given us in our generation something to understand what that type of disaster really is. And I've always said that I don't believe unless you lived through Hurricane Ivan on Grand Cayman, you couldn't understand what it was like to have that kind of wind and that kind of torment outside of your home or your shelter. And I didn't understand it personally until Paloma hit Cayman Brac. But the thing that has remained with me from Hurricane Ivan is the resilience of the Caymanian people, including all three islands. Because in Cayman Brac, we joined together immediately to understand what our place was going to be in the rebuild of this country and to offer ourselves. I remember you and I joining immediately to understand how we could help Grand Cayman being in Cayman Brac and staging. But I remember the day that Cayman Airways landed in Cayman Brac, full of 116 people from Grand Cayman, with the eyes wide open of each person that got off the plane, almost in a state of shock. And the children, with the only thing they had were diapers on. And most of the young families had gym shorts and t-shirts, and that's all that they could account for as having as a possession in life. And I remember the community feeling of there was no question of what we were going to do or how we were going to get things to them and help them. We opened the doors that hundreds of people came from Grand Cayman and stayed for as long as they needed to stay. Going down in the mornings to take ice and sandwiches to send on the planes to come to Grand Cayman. Madam Speaker, it's a lifelong remembrance that puts things all in perspective of who we really are. And to me, it makes me understand what it means to be Caymanian, what it means to be here to help somebody else when they're in need. And Madam Speaker, as I remember Ivan, as the other members who have spoke before me, and I'm sure the members that will speak after, the thing that I will always take away from that experience is how everybody came together and rebuilt these 3 islands, but mainly Grand Cayman, to make it stronger and better than it was before. And I truly trust that each person, each Caymanian takes away from that experience, and their memory will be what it means to help other people. I give God thanks this morning for what he did for us during the storm and after the storm in helping us rebuild. And I will always be grateful for those mercies. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the Honorable Minister for Health.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for this opportunity, and to say to my people out there listening and viewing that today is indeed a day that I would encourage all and sundry to take a moment to pause and to reflect, a quiet moment, because we all have our own experiences, some a lot more traumatic than others, but I think no one can say that they weren't impacted by this event 10 years ago. God is truly good, and I think that Ivan was visited upon us for a reason, for us to find that strength, that character, that togetherness. It's unfortunate that since Ivan, we seem too quickly to forget sometimes what made us get through that time. That bond of friendship, that level playing field, where we all stood in line, the rich, the poor, the ugly, the pretty, the black, the white. It didn't matter. We were all on one level playing field, those that stayed behind anyway. Madam Speaker, my wife and I just taken our eldest son to university in Waterloo, and we got back the next week. Ivan came. My wife and 2 younger kids had to move to Canada for her to work, for her organization, and my son had to come back from university to save my life. I remember the flies, I remember the hum of the generators, I remember burning up everything in my house with generators, not knowing how to use them. I remember the corned beef. I remember bathing with a cup of water. A cup of water. We were happy to have a cup of water each to bathe with. Now, we spend hours in the shower. Humble times, Madam Speaker, but, you know, I think it certainly is, it has put things in perspective, and you know, we no longer, I think everybody's mindset now is pre and post Ivan. We tend to classify things as before Ivan or after Ivan. It's such a huge event. I remember that morning of the 12th, after securing the house, because where I live, we didn't have any great deal of water. We didn't have any water to worry about. We had a lot of wind, and lost a bit of roof and one window. Pretty much that was the extent of the damage at the time. But leaving there in the safety of that Northwood area and going out on the bay, as we call it, which is up Guardhouse Hill, past my mother's house. We couldn't drive past there. We had to park. And when I hit the top of that hill with my family, Bodden Town looked like one big beach. There was no road. It was just white sand, conch shells, fish, you name it. I had to really, it was still blowing 70 miles an hour, so we're holding on to each other going up through there. And shells, you name it, are out there. The grape trees that I grew up playing in, and anybody who remembers our property, remember the magnificent grape trees we had on that beach, had all gone. The landscape was unrecognizable. My gas station, the only thing that remained, because I can remember former Minister Clifford and I, Texaco at the time had told us to make sure we wrap my gas pumps with plastic. And we went to the Civic Center to make sure the people were in shelter there. And we weren't elected at this time. This was 2004. We were on the verge of elections, of course. And we were doing community work anyway. And we wrapped my pumps with this heavy-duty plastic that Texaco gave us. Well, it should have been something else, because the pumps, all now I haven't seen them. They disappeared. The pump island disappeared. There was nothing. All was left was our original building in Bodden Town, the original shop. And the only reason that survived is because it runs perpendicular to the beach. The length of it is perpendicular to the beach, I believe. The liquor store was demolished. The people were helping themselves. I couldn't even bother to tell them, don't, just take it, go. And, but to see afterwards the way that we came together, the way that we helped each other, and I want to say that it is indeed a time for Thanksgiving. And having said that, I want to basically let the public know that this year, on this 10th anniversary, the government, the Premier will make a declaration in due course, but we will be formally recognizing Cayman Thanksgiving in these islands. We know that we've had a group that's been organizing Thanksgiving in Cayman for some time, and we are going to make that into a formal recognition that we will have our own recognized Thanksgiving official day. So I just want everybody to pause and reflect and be thankful for God's mercies, and to remember that we can all do with a little less. Because those days, it wasn't about what you had. You were just grateful, and you were able to work with the little that you had. And these times, oftentimes, we are caught up in material things, and we often forget what made us get through that time. And I also before I sit, I just want to say that in Bodden Town, we didn't lose any lives with the storm, but afterwards, it took a lot of our elderly people in particular. A lot of them passed away because of Ivan, because of their losses, because they couldn't handle it. And I want to remember those people and their families, and just ask us to, today, please take time out and let's all reflect and be thankful. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Does another member wish to speak? The Honorable Minister for Education.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I too would like to express my extreme gratefulness and thankfulness for God's mercies in sparing this beloved country during that most harrowing experience. But Madam Speaker, I also rise to recognize and to, I guess, acknowledge the unique survivor story, which is not often told during these times, one that I myself experienced, which is actually being overseas when the storm hit, and where all my life, my family, my loved ones, everything that I knew as being home was basically under attack during Hurricane Ivan. And Madam Speaker, the experience for me and many of not hearing anything from anyone for me it was up to 5 days, has to have been the most difficult experience that I have ever had to experience. And I know I can't compare to say which was worse, but Madam Speaker, it was an awful experience that I think many people would be able to empathize with that may have been in the same situation. I remember I was in my third year of law school critical year, as many people would know. And I was on the phone with my family when the phone cut off, and I said, okay, it's going to take a while before I hear from them. First day dragged on. Second day dragged on. Third day dragged on. By that time, I was just not sure whether I was coming or going. But Madam Speaker, one of the things that really kept me and many people going was the online community that formed of many Caymanians and friends of Cayman who somehow I was invited to be a part of, and I give thanks on a daily basis because that was my lifeline to what was happening at home. Now, on the other hand, it was a bit of a double-edged sword because I heard all of the stories about what was happening in East End, what was happening in Bodden Town, what was happening in Georgetown, North Side, radio silence about West Bay. So that just added to my anxiety because I knew and my family knew how worried I was, and I knew if they could get the message somehow, they would get a message. And the fact that no messages came or nobody in the online community could say what was happening in the District of West Bay just increased the level of anxiety. And of course, at that time, you think the worst. But, Madam Speaker, I say that to say that the isolation that many of us felt during that time of being helpless, being able to watch the news, being able to see the storm of the ice, being able to see the beautiful, perfect storm that Ivan was, but not being able to do anything about helping or even knowing what was going on, and in this case, with my own family in the District of West Bay, until I got a call on the 5th day from a family friend who managed to make it to Georgetown, because that's the only how they had the signal. And at that time, Madam Speaker, I starting to feel very emotional going back there, but suffice it to say, I am so very grateful for the sense of community that I experienced upon returning home when that first flight was able to come into the island. But Madam Speaker, again, it may be a unique perspective for many, but flying into Cayman and seeing what, to me, had to be the closest thing to Armageddon in terms of the aerial view was something that I actually don't ever want to see again. I didn't take any pictures. I haven't seen any pictures. It's just one of those things where the memories will last forever. But, Madam Speaker, the efforts of that online community, the efforts of that community of Caymanians abroad that helped to get the children overseas, help to get the elderly people overseas as soon as possible. Madam Speaker, this country will remember that out of necessity there was a mass exodus of school-age children going to Cayman Brac, going to the US, going to the UK, going to wherever they could get to find that family members or family connections. Myself and many other persons who were in that position helped to facilitate that. And again, it's that coming together of the community as a whole. Community here who actually experienced it on the ground, but the community of persons that actually experienced it overseas and in support. And Madam Speaker, I remember when, as I said, I was able to fly in, and at the time they were just limiting the flights for Caymanians coming into the country. And so I got onto the very first flight. I was able to get in, and I stopped via Texas to stock up. And I remember speaking to one family member, and I could hear the strain and the emotion when I asked, what is it that you need? And the response was, bring Spam. And Madam Speaker, at that moment, I realized how very difficult things must have been for people here. And I think I bought every can of Spam on the shelf. I maxed out that credit card just to make sure that I could bring all I could to support the people that I love and the community at large, because as many of you in here will remember, it really became a village at that time, a village that we should never forget is important. And as we say, it takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a village to build a nation. And so I think that that feeling, that sense of community, that sense of responsibility for each other is something that I hope that we never forget. And as legislators, I hope that we continue to embody that in the way that we approach governance of this country, but also the people in the way that they interact with one another. And so, Madam Speaker, I give thanks for living in an era of technological advancement. And oftentimes, the power of that to mobilize people for good or bad is often seen. But in this case, Madam Speaker, it was a godsend for many of the Caymanian community that I represented during the Ivan experience. And for that, I'm extremely grateful for those persons that took it upon themselves to make that organized effort happen, and to say thank God for his mercies for bringing us back and far exceeding where we were before Ivan. Thank you.
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Finance. I beg your pardon. I did catch the eye from the member of Northside, but he's graciously given way to Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thanks to the member from Northside for the opportunity to speak. Madam Speaker, I will be brief, as you have said 2 to 3 minutes. I respect that. Like Minister Rivers, I too was overseas when Hurricane Ivan struck the Cayman Islands. I had left the country about 3 weeks before the storm arrived. And just, I think about a week or two ago, I was sharing my experience with Minister Panton. And I was moved to tears at the time because I remember the sense of helplessness as you watched what you knew would be absolute terror and destruction approach. A system that was 400 to 500 miles in diameter approach an island that is 22 by 8 or 24 by 8 miles. You didn't have to figure too much what would happen. But the hardest part for me, Madam Speaker, was being across the Atlantic and not knowing what was happening. There was a news blackout on the Cayman Islands, of course, for those of you who would remember. And in not knowing what was happening and not being able to communicate with your family, for 3 days, Madam Speaker, I did not know if my wife and 15-month-old child were dead or alive. And for me, that was the hardest part, because if you are here, and I can't begin to compare the two. I don't know which one would be worse, whether I was here and experiencing it or there and wondering. But for me, that was the most difficult part, not knowing if my loved ones were dead or alive. And of course, you had the occasional text message, but they were all very, how can I put it? They weren't very encouraging, the few messages that you did receive. Many of them referred to total destruction, and those were people who were in other districts. No one could communicate from the district of West Bay, where my wife and child were at the time. I remember running from one television to the next, just trying to find a television channel that would say, or even give some indication as to what had happened in the Cayman Islands. They showed you that the storm had destroyed Grenada. They showed you that the storm had brushed Jamaica. And then they showed you that the storm had gone on to Cuba. But if you were not aware that the Cayman Islands was somewhere in the vicinity of Cuba and Jamaica, you would assume that nothing, it was all well. So, the lack of information, the inability to speak to your loved ones, and just being totally incapable of lending any assistance was for me the hardest part. But there was one or two good things that I did benefit from Hurricane Ivan, or three. One was that I discovered that my wife is a lot stronger than I thought she was. 2, I learned to appreciate texting, because I always wondered why people would spend 10 minutes typing a text when a telephone call was only 30 seconds. And 3, Madam Speaker, was that I recognized and I realized that in the face of helplessness, one should never be hopeless. So my faith was that God would be merciful and that there would be no loss of life. I never worried too much about material things and destruction of property because those things can be replaced. But those 3 things for me were perhaps the most important lessons that I was able to receive from what was otherwise a very difficult experience in my life and many other people. But thank you for the opportunity, Madam Speaker.
Member from Northside.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I represent the district that I guess receives the most blessings or was spared the most during Hurricane Ivan. Those who look for other reasons other than the mercies of God will tell you that that was because when the wind was coming onshore, it was during the low tide hours. So that is why we got less damage, but we believe more that it was the mercies of God. But our community came together, and while we suffered long after Hurricane Ivan before we got electricity and water, because most of the houses had cisterns, and we could drive around, some of us with a little generator on the back of your truck with gasoline that was provided us from a local private company and some from Public Works. Most people could enjoy a shower, which many other districts couldn't, very shortly after Ivan, because we just went from house to house and pumped up people's tanks twice a day. So they had running water, although they didn't have electricity. And it certainly brought our community together, and our community will be eternally grateful for the mercies that we received in Hurricane Ivan. I guess the people who were frightened the most, unfortunately, I guess, was those who were in the hurricane shelter because of the damage that occurred to that hurricane shelter, similar to some that happened in other hurricane shelters as well. So the community makes sure now that every May we ensure that the Civic Center is fit for habitation, etc., in case there is a hurricane, and we dedicate one day every year in May to going there and cleaning it up and making sure that stuff is there. So we are grateful for the mercies we received, and we'll always remember Ivan. I remember the morning after Ivan, my greatest shock was there wasn't a single leaf on a single tree. And on the west side of my house, there was all of these green trees that didn't exist before Ivan, because they were all birch trees, so they were red. But the wind had removed all of the redness from every birch tree, and they were all bright green and leafless. I could see almost all the way to the intersection with Old Man Bay because there was no bush, no leaves. And the intensity of the storm is not to be passed over lightly, because I saw in my yard where the wind removed an asphalt shingle from the roof of the building next to my swimming pool and stuck it vertically into a birch tree. Now that tells you some of the force of the wind. And I don't consider myself a weak person. And my grandfather always told us to keep windows or a door on each side of the house that you can open under the lee, so that you don't get the vacuum effect which removes the roof off your house. So my front door was open all during the hurricane because the wind was on the other side. And I remember coming at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I will never forget the sound of the wind. It sounded like a jet engine. And I held my hand out and attempted to pull it into the wind. And I could not move my hand. The wind was so strong, even with open fingers. So anybody who believes that there was not force to hurricane and that the Cayman Islands was not blessed by a greater power than all of us can imagine is missing the whole point and the lesson to be learned from Ivan. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Recognize the Honorable Deputy Speaker, first elected member from Bodden Town.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I note this morning with irony, as I'm sure those on this side see, my good friend from West Bay, the namesake of Ivan, Mr. Farrington. Not the devil, he's a good man. He's here. Madam Speaker, Ivan was, to me, the worst nightmare in my life, just hearing the name. And when I see or hear of any disturbance coming in to the Caribbean, I just tense up. Madam Speaker, I take us back to another time, Hurricane Gilbert, when these islands suffered greatly. But it was nothing in comparison to Ivan. Ivan was an element that I think continued as part of the warning that Gilbert gave us. We need to get our act together here in Cayman and throughout the world. We're being warned, and as we look around throughout the world, the signs that we see, I urge us all to take warning. Some of the things that I certainly remember is when we were able to get stuff from containers up in Bodden Town. It was parked at that time in Jerry Woodyard, and to go about and deliver to those people who were in need. And 10 years later, as I go into the supermarket, Madam Speaker, people still come up to me and remember and thank me and my wife. I also remember Steve McField being there with us delivering. I don't remember some of those people that I delivered to, but up until now, they're grateful. Ivan was a situation that brought these islands together like I've never seen before in my 6 decades. There was a unity that was there that crossed all boundaries, political and as alluded to earlier on, whether colored or whatever, white, Caucasian, whatever, however you want to describe, there was no division. I remember the heat that we went through, and as everybody know about the generators, the rumbling. As the member from Northside say, I will never, never forget that howling sound. I was blessed to be in a house that stood up with it, which I was able to share with people from across the district, Caymanians, non-Caymanians, to help them. That's what life is about. Let us remember God spared us. And as the Deputy Premier said, I want us to remember Cayman Brac, the devastation that they also went through, and how prior to that, how Cayman Brac, as small as they were able to facilitate many of our school children and other people that lived there, how they were able to send ice and different things to us. Breadfruits. How could we live without those breadfruits? And I also, like the member from Northside, there was not one single green leaf on any part of this island. As one of the people that came here described Cayman to help clear up, it had looked like Vietnam when they dropped a bomb and cleaned us up. Madam Speaker, I cannot not take opportunity to read a couple of sentences, verses from Revelation 8. We think that Ivan was bad, Madam Speaker. Just want to, for those of us that believe in the Bible, just want to leave three verses with you from Revelations 8. End time, this is, as portrayed by John. He said, the first angel blew his trumpet, and there was a storm of hail and fire mingled with blood cast upon the earth. And a third part of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees was burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. These are just the same thing that you and I observed in this little island. But this is the entire earth. The second angel blew his trumpet, and something resembling a great mountain, blazing with fire, was hurled into the sea. And a third of the sea was turned to blood. A third of the living creatures in the sea perished, and a third of the ships were destroyed. It's just a part of it. And I would encourage all of us to get the opportunity to read. Madam Speaker, Ivan was a warning. Let us not waste when we get these signs that come that we don't understand. They're happening throughout the world rapidly. Wars upon wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes in diverse places. But I would encourage all of us, bipartisan, to live together to the betterment of our people. And I must remind us as leaders and legislators, as I visit some of the homes still from Ivan, 10 years later, these people are still suffering. Roofs are leaking. We must do better than this, whatever it takes. And this is not about politics, Madam Speaker. It's how I feel. I've seen those people in anguish, and it's a disgrace that one of the top finance centers in the world, and we can't make better provision for some of our people. There is a limitation on our budget, but we must make some exceptions. May God bless us all, Madam Speaker.
Recognize Honourable Minister responsible for planning.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, while listening to all of my colleagues, the first thing that I remembered outside of all the memories waking up 2 or 3 times last night because I knew today was the day, and looking up at my ceiling and saying, well, at least it's not leaking now, was when it was announced, this was some time after the hurricane, that the maximum wind speed was estimated to be 135 miles an hour. And I don't care who that was or where that was, they were wrong. Big time. Madam Speaker, I, like all of us, have vivid memories, some of which I don't wish to remember but can't help remembering, of during, or let me start, before, some people not wanting to leave their homes and us knowing how, or having a good idea of what was coming our way, and cajoling them first of all to tell them, get in the bus, you have to go to the shelter because you have no idea what's coming. And getting to the point where I remember, especially one group of people, I actually had to pretend like I was angry with them and start hauling and shoving and pushing them into the bus. And I knew they were mad. Of course, by the time I got to the shelter 2 days later and they saw me, they started crying and thanking me for being so hard on them, because they found out later that the water had gone up to the ceiling of where they were living. And I remember too, Madam Speaker, it took me 2 days to get to Rock Hole. 2 days, meaning couldn't get there on Monday because there were too many impediments in the way. Let me just put it that way. And I always remember seeing Mr. Joe Forbes. Somehow or the other, one of his chairs survived, and he was outside sitting down with his elbows on his knees. And I said to him, Mr. Joe, I know, but all of us have felt it. And he quietly looked up and he said, yes, son, I know you know. I just don't know how many other people know what has just happened to us. And he said to me, in his usual slow drawl, he said, God is a powerful God. And we just saw his power unleashed. And in the same breath he said, but he's also a merciful God, because you see all of us are still here. That's what he said. And he was so right. Madam Speaker, I'm not even so sure that I would want to speak to some of the events. I'm not so sure I want to relive them more and more, because some of them were hard, really hard. But we have to be extremely grateful, just as all who spoke before me have mentioned, that we all came together. And Madam Speaker, even the businesses who are usually in the cut and thrust of competition threw all of that one side. And those who could help by supplying, supplied. And in our district in Georgetown, the now Premier and myself, along with many, many other volunteers, some are looking at us. The member from East End, in his usual light-hearted manner, said you wouldn't come to East End. But he was joking, because he knew that he and I were in contact. And he also knows that we did come. And he also knows that I remember, that I remember very vividly how he got to East End the first time, because we waved each other when he was on the bulldozer, and our good friend Jody was driving the bulldozer, and he was headed east. At that time, we were trying to make sense of Bodden Town. And we had not gotten to town yet, because Ocean Club, the entire building or buildings, had come out into the middle of the road on Spot Street. Mariners Cove, forgive me, not Ocean Club. Ocean Club was devastated also, but Mariners Cove was out in the middle of the road, and they were still working when I tried to get to town. They were that Monday. They were still working on trying to make way that we could get past, and it took till it was late that night before we could get that way. But Madam Speaker, we keep hearing about the resilience of our people, and I know that there are many of us who have memories which will tell us that that is so true. But Madam Speaker, those were really hard times. It was so hard every day making up our little bags of groceries and necessities, and then heading out every morning to deliver, because that was the only way plenty of people survived. and you had to spend half of the time pretending that you were fine, consoling other people with their losses, and trying to encourage them that just give it some time. Let's keep it together and it will get better, as it did, thank God. And that was hard. I have to tell you, Madam Speaker, I wish not to be misunderstood with my statement, but for a long, long time in my life, I have known what it is to be my brother's keeper. Not politics, but that's just from whence I cometh and how I grew and what I have become. But I've never seen it like that, not before or after. And my good friend, the first elected member from Borden Town, I had to hear him first before I spoke, because I know him. And just listening to what he said, because I know him well enough, I know what's in his mind on a day like today. You know what, Madam Speaker? If nothing more today, thinking of all that has happened, a day like today will bring back many memories, and by tomorrow, most of them will be gone again. But you know what I really wish? I really wish that somehow or the other, we, all of us, in here and outside, could go back to how that was just after Ivan, without making another Ivan happen for us to come together again. You know, if we look at every day of our lives, we have come to the point where everybody wants a pound of flesh, whether it's with words or physically, or whether it's my time to get back at you. And that's a pity, because that is not what God intended us to be as a nation. So my prayer today, as we reminisce, and in one breath, we are saddened with many memories, but in another breath, we are proud as a nation how we have rebuilt this country. Let us remember, Madam Speaker, that rebuilding a country physically is very important. But as a people, how we live among ourselves is what truly will sustain us. Thank you.
Recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
I would like to, Madam Speaker, first thank my colleague here for allowing me to go before him. I tried to give the elders of the House the floor before us rookies jump in. But I too have some things that stood out in my mind from Ivan. The Premier touched on it right at the beginning when he said, at the time we may have only lost 2 lives, but the aftermath is where we lost, and my father was one of them. And like the member from East End, there were some people that were never given thanks or recognition. I remember as the hurricane eased up, Jesse Smith, who has tobaccos, came over and I jumped on one. He said, you do the coastline inland. I'll go and try to see what it is like to get into town. And he spent 2 days up around the public beach area, which we all know has always been an area where the seas and the sands would come over. And he was up there 2 or 3 days until the Public Works big loader and the Jacksons, they also put their loaders in there to try to clear the road into town for the West Bears. But one of the first things was during Ivan, sitting there, my father said, and I had what? Plus my family, plus another 7 other nationalities in my house. And my father said something that so funny. These older people always seem to have, Madam Speaker, insight in what's going to happen. He had told my friends where not to park their cars. Some of them didn't listen and they lost their vehicles. The second thing he said when we were sitting there, he says, you know who I feel sorry for after this? It's the little people that can't afford the big lawyers when these insurance companies rape us. He was so right, once again. And like the minister said, we should have learned from this, not only like what the Premier said about the preparation and the hazard management and all those things, but us as legislators should ensure that after Ivan, and even going forward, that we must protect our people from these, make me be kind and say, these companies that insure us here, that show their true colors after Ivan, a lot of them. And Ivan also taught me something, that it was my time was past, and that is that Texaco, I was the operator of Texaco Express Lube, which was one of the most looked after buildings in this country after Ivan, because the whole building came about 7 or 8 foot out of the ground and twisted. Italy has their leaning tower. We had our leaning building here in Cayman as well. And Texaco flew in 3 aircraft worth of supplies. I was given the task of distributing them, and seeing the fact that the leader of the opposition had West Bay covered, my first stop was to try to get into East End. And in East End, on the way up, I remember passing the first elected member from Bordentown and his former colleague, Mark Scotland. And I got into East End and we're dropping off, and we were in this little yard. And this little young fellow looks at me and says, I know you. You're the football girl's daddy. All of a sudden I realized it wasn't my time anymore. It was not, she was not my girl anymore. I was her daddy. So Ivan was an eye-opener on a lot of things. At that time, just before Ivan hit, my daughter had signed her Division I football scholarship to go play in the States. And during Ivan, we got knocked off of a motorbike. Never forget that. And when I'm jumping off the ground, I'm seeing blood, but I'm screaming, where's my daughter? And all of a sudden I heard her saying, don't worry about me. Take care of my daddy. He's getting old. So it was a lot of eye-openers during Ivan. And another thing was sitting on the steps of Express Loop, feeling sad, and having Javi Gregory ride up on a bicycle, look at me and says, Mr. B, it's nice to see you alive. As simple as that way sounded, it meant a lot. These are some of the small things that I have come to remember about Ivan. Like other members have said, and Minister Tibbetts just said as well, it's a pity we could not have kept the togetherness that we had after Ivan, because we were together. I remember getting some gas, and every 2 or 3 days, going fishing, jigging for jacks, and going about giving people jacks, giving people fish in West Bay. That was so nice. And I'd give people fish. They said, well, I had some breadfruits, blow off my tree, take 1 or 2. Then we got some breadfruit from the brack. The porters sent some breadfruit down for me. They didn't send no soldiers, though we wanted soldiers crab. But they wouldn't send none of them for us. Moses made sure that they wouldn't send them out. But the one thing that I'll always remember about Ivan, that stands out above everything, was the beauty of the sky at night. There was no street lights. It was dark. And you sit outside and the sky was so beautiful. In spite of all the devastation around us, the sky was something awesome to look at. So let us remember, let us don't forget those hard times, because it should be a lesson to us. Let us also remember the togetherness and see if we can reach to that. And like what the first elected member from Borden Town said, I'm reaching across the aisle and asking, there's still quite a few homes in West Bay who have leaking roofs and have some problems. If you all can help me help them, I would appreciate it. But thank you, Madam Speaker, for this time. I hope I have not overstayed my 3 minutes. Thank you.
I recognize the Honourable Minister responsible for Financial Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I think you've set a very difficult target of 3 minutes. I think that's been ably demonstrated by all of my colleagues. I suppose my colleague Minister, Mr. Archer, says except him. I didn't time him, but I think he probably did go over. Madam Speaker, I don't blame any of them. It is impossible for us to stand here and talk about the impacts of Ivan, talk about our recollections, and say how thankful we are literally within the 2 to 3 minutes. I'm actually running a stop clock to see, but I would like to say, I'm just starting it now, Madam Speaker. Give myself a head start. Thank you for the opportunity. Ivan was just one of those defining moments in all of our lives. It was a defining moment in our country. My colleague on my left here referred to the way we talk about Ivan as before Ivan and after Ivan. That is absolutely the case. I actually hope that will always be the case, because there is a great potential, Madam Speaker, for us in the geographic location we are in the Caribbean, to have future events even within our lifetime. And I think one of the lessons that we need to learn from Ivan is to continue to be prepared, to remember, as everybody has said, I think, the level of community, spirit, cooperation that is necessary for us as a country, as a people, to emerge successfully from an event like that. I unfortunately think it will happen again in our lifetimes. I hope that it will be a very long time from now. Statistically, my hope will be shattered. If you look at the statistics, every 5.5 or so years, Cayman is brushed or hit by hurricane force winds, at least for a few hours. And I think we all know that we're actually overdue now. Statistically, we're overdue. So the lesson for us is to remember how we, as a country, succeeded, how we helped each other, how we were there for each other. Because it is possible that we may need to count on those memories and to put that in practice in the future. The memories there are many painful memories. There are many things, there are many memories that make us ache for what our people went through, what our country suffered. The member from Northside talked about not a single tree having a leaf. I think one of the things that it taught me was actually how small our island is. Because I could stand in my front yard and see Georgetown. I could stand in my front yard and see clear through to Spot Strait. When we finally got electricity back on 3 months later, that was even more clear, because you could see the full extent of our country. The leaves hadn't all come back then, and you could see lights in every part of the island, that you thought was separated by a great deal of distance, because we're not conscious about it when we're driving around and we're separated by a lot of growth and trees and buildings. We have a small country, we have a small island, and the Bracken Little Cayman, of course, even smaller. We have to remember that, and we have to, even though the memories are painful, we have to keep them there and learn from them and rely on them when we need to. Madam Chair, I'd also like to thank, I sent my family to the BRAC. I was very fortunate to be able to do that. And I'm eternally grateful to my friends in the BRAC who looked after my family. I never had a thought of public life at that time. But over a period of months, I realized what the leaders and representatives of the country must have felt. Because first I was worried about my family. They were taken care of by my good friends in the BRAC. And they were there for a couple of months. Even went to school there. Eternally grateful. My next issue was worried about the business, the firm that I was a managing partner in, taking care of them, 300 plus staff, worried about how to deal with them, getting them off, bringing in chartered planes, filling those chartered planes with equipment, generators to just distribute to staff, to other people. One of the most painful things for me was being at the airport, physically loading the plane myself, helping to load the plane with baggage, then realizing that we had empty seats. We could have taken on another 20 or 25 people, I think it was, running into the airport, going out there and looking at this massive line of humanity, our own Caymanians that were suffering with children, infirmities, standing in the heat. And I had to force myself to run along that line of people and make the difficult decision of identifying those people that I thought were probably more in need of getting out of Cayman because of their circumstances. And there were some elderly people, there were people with young children, families with young children. And I remember getting them on that plane, filling every seat, and then looking around the plane and realizing that there were seats filled by young children. So I then asked them all, the parents of those children, to hold those children in their laps. Found more empty seats that way and went and got more people. When that plane took off that day, I sat on the edge of the tarmac there and cried like a baby. It's just one of those defining moments in our lives. And I want us all to remember it. And my colleague, minister, from the first elected member from Georgetown, talked about the same thing. Let's try to reflect what we learned from that, and let's try to put it in practice every day in our lives. And I would like to encourage all of my colleagues in this honorable house to remember that we have the opportunity every time we are in here to demonstrate that very thing and to do that very thing. Let us be leaders and demonstrate that to the people of the country. Madam Speaker, I appreciate the opportunity. I know I've gone on. I'm about at least 3 minutes over. But thank you once again. I'm happy that Cayman is where it's at. I think that we will have to, as painful as they are, rely on memories in the future to get us through. But I think we're up to it. We've done it before, and I have complete confidence in the people of this country, in the leaders of this country, now and in the future, to be able to do that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The fourth elected member from West Bay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I too would like to give God thanks for sparing us after Ivan. I look at Ivan as a reality check. It reminded me of the days when I was a boy, how closely knit our community was. Everybody looked after one another. And I share the sentiments of the Minister for Planning, in that if it could be done without another hurricane, just to bring Caymanians, bring people who live here, bring us back together for 3 or 4 or 5 months, just to let us appreciate how good God has been to us, to bring us back at this point in our life. Madam Speaker, I remember it started on a Saturday evenings. I guess about 9 o'clock, I couldn't get out because the winds were just too strong. I was helping, boarding up some people who couldn't help themselves, boarding up their houses after distributing the plywood, which was donated by most of the merchants, the hardware suppliers, that is. And was a gentleman, Dave, he was building a big complex up at East End, and he had a bunch of sheeting, and he gave us, I forgot how many 100 sheets of sheeting to help to give people to board up their house. Madam Speaker, it's an experience that I will never ever forget. It's etched on my memory, and I'm sure everybody who's lived through it will never forget it. But God has been good to us. He spared us. A lot of people, because of the stress from Ivan, passed away shortly after Ivan. But there were only 2 lives lost during the hurricane, and we have to give God thanks. But just to reflect on how much the hurricane brought us together, I remember, and just to recognize some people who were exceptional, generous. Mike's Ice sent his ice truck down to West Bay, parked by the 4-way stop, and distributed ice free of cost to anybody who, until it ran out, anybody could come and get it. 1 bag of ice each. The Flowers family, they sent their tanker truck down to the play field, and everybody could come. They would bring a 5-gallon container, and they would fill it up free of charge. One gentleman I can't forget he works for Operation Blessing, Bill Horan. He has a house in Northside. The first Cayman Airways flight that came in here loaded with hurricane supplies, he sent it. At no cost to government, no cost to us. Chainsaws, generators, tarpaulins, ready-to-eat meals, any medical supplies for kids, pampers, as much stuff as the plane could hold. And before I get off of that, before the hurricane, before we could recover from the hurricane, he had sent 10 40-foot containers of water and Snapple and blankets, and I just can't even remember half of the supplies. 10 40-foot containers and 2 20-foot containers, all to Cayman. He arranged for the shipping. We didn't have to pay for the shipping. The duties were waived at no cost to us. It was distributed throughout the island as best we could, mostly through the Red Cross. And we can't thank that operation, that gentleman enough, because he was an exception. And as far as clearing the roads, Harlow Ray Banks, and he had a front-end loader, a backhoes, and he would get in there and try to make clear the road so we could get across because all the trees were blocking them. Jesse Smith as well. All of the Alfredo Powery, all the guys with heavy equipment got out there and just didn't ask any questions, just went to work. But getting back to Minister for Finance, his sentiments, the helplessness. I remember my son calling me after midnight, just before we lost the phone services, and he lives by the water, and the water was coming up over his swimming pool, getting into his house, and he needed my help. I couldn't get to him. The trees, the roads are blocked. I just couldn't get to him. Just a sense of helplessness with him and his family and some of my kids besides that, other kids. It was an awful feeling. And Madam Speaker, we have to give God thanks. And I thank God every day over my head for sparing us and for keeping us. And, you know, we as human beings are so quick to forget how closer we were during the hurricane. And as soon as we got the running water back and the lights back, we all go our separate ways again. And Madam Speaker, I just want to reiterate that we should never forget the blessings of God. Thank you so much.
Recognize the fourth elected member from Bawden Town.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on this occasion. I also will try to be brief. Madam Speaker, I remember, and I think the Minister for Financial Services alluded to it too, the preparation that I went through. At the time that Ivan was taking aim at these islands, and I was at the time the director of IT at the firm where the minister worked. He was one of my bosses at the time, and we spent, I think, many hours preparing for that storm. We made sure that the firm was secure, the staff was secure. There was a lot of work that went into that. And I remember working with my team at the firm and being in awe of the dedication that I was seeing, because they were also having to go home and prepare their homes. But they made sure that they took care of their responsibilities at work so that they could go home and take care of their families with a clear conscience and a clear mind. And I think after we all went home, we still didn't really have a good sense of how serious it was going to be. I remember going to the ATM and withdrawing $100, thinking that would be just enough cash to see me through until the storm passed and everything got back to normal. And I think it was 3 days later I heard a chainsaw up the top of my road, and that was Minister Panton cutting the bush back so that I could actually drive out of my house and then come out into the real world again. But, you know, we laugh now, but it was a lesson that I learned. I was prepared at work. My staff was prepared, but I personally hadn't prepared. And that's one lesson I'll never forget. I don't think I saw an ATM for about 2 months. Madam Speaker, when I did manage to make it out of my home, the entire area that I was living there in Newlands looked like a bomb blast. And the thing that got me the most was driving at night. I was one of those people who was fortunate to have a pass, so I was able to break curfew and come out at night. And it was just so disorienting. I remember driving and getting lost because all those familiar landmarks that you're so used to seeing, you know, we don't go by house numbers, we go by the tree or the house or something familiar. All those things were different or gone, or You know, it was a really eerie feeling, and I remember driving and being completely lost for a few minutes, not knowing where I was in this small little island. But we do have to be thankful. We do have to give thanks to God for pulling us through that experience. I think that experience taught me a lot about myself. It taught us all a lot about ourselves. I learned that I was a plumber, a carpenter, electrician, mechanic, all at one. That was the time that we all had to dig deep, help each other, work together. And, you know, it's sad to see that in some instances we have lost that camaraderie, that caring about each other. But I think it's still there. I think that in times like disaster with Ivan and so on, it'll reemerge. Well, I think what we need to do is make sure that we try to remember those lessons learned and try to remember that we treat each other as brothers and sisters and neighbors, you know, in everything that we do. And I think we'll be much better off for that. I have to echo what my colleague, the first elected member from Bordentown said, Madam Speaker, about remembering that there are those among us who still have not recovered fully from the effects and devastation of Hurricane Ivan. We do have to look out for those people. And I urge every member in this honorable House to bear those people in mind as we go about performing our duties and doing the work that we were elected to come here and do. There are many who are still suffering. There are many who still have not completely repaired their homes. And we have a duty and an obligation to look after them. I think the most important lesson, though, and the most important reminder that I want to leave everyone here with today is the one that I learned personally, is to be prepared, because it can happen again. And statistics say it will. So, preparation, personally, is key for our survival. We have to make sure that we are prepared and that we can survive another devastation like Ivan. But working together, I don't have any doubt that we will pull through whatever disasters may come our way. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the sixth elected member from Georgetown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And thank you for the opportunity this morning, Madam Speaker, to do a bit of reflecting, do a bit of remembering where we've been, where we've come to, and to give thanks and appreciation for it. Madam Speaker, the period during and after Ivan will stick with everyone for many different reasons. We heard so many of the stories here today. Myself, I had just become the president of the Chamber of Commerce on the 9th. I think it was, it was the last event held at the Hyatt, in the ballroom at the Hyatt. And quite frankly, after making my way into town over the weekend and sleeping the night in a friend of mine's garage up by the Truman Bodden complex, and getting my phone charged because he had a generator. I didn't remember I was a chamber president until the phone rang, and I was summoned to a meeting over at Appleby with the governor and the government at the time. Madam Speaker, that was a very difficult task for me at the time, and I remember thinking that my brother and I, once we found a vehicle that worked, we had 17 fleet vehicles at the time, and we had 2 that worked. And ironically, the 2 vehicles were because of individuals who had we had issued an order that everyone park the vehicles, and these 2 employees drove them home, so we were grateful for that. And Madam Speaker, we had to go around and find all of our 100 and odd employees. As you would know, throughout our businesses, some of our employees are those on the lower end of the spectrum, and we knew that the conditions and the areas that they were living in were not the best. And thankfully, Madam Speaker, we got word out and we were able to account for everyone and start rebuilding and helping those who wanted to get home and mobilizing those who are willing to help. Madam Speaker, my time at the Chamber was a very interesting one, and I just very quickly want to reflect on that and talk about how we as a community came together. The Chamber of Commerce, which was right next door, was very fortunate. It had no damage. Because it's on the main line to the hospital, we had power within 2 days. And very quickly that became the planning office. It became a labor office. We registered well over 300 and something persons who were seeking to assist or were seeking employment. We housed all of the planning inspectors at the time, and just so the amount of persons who wanted to help, the outpouring of help was tremendous. One of the things, Madam Speaker, that I remember was when the announcement came that cruise ships were coming back. At the end of November, I think it was, Madam Speaker, the private sector rallied together under the umbrella of the Chamber, and if you can remember, they cleaned the entire port area and all the way down the West Bay Road to the Turtle Farm. I think they swept. I saw people out there from the heavy equipment to people with brooms and dustpans, and I don't think the road had ever been or has ever been as clean as it was when they got through. And the funding for that was well over $600,000, which was 100% donated by the private sector at that time. Madam Speaker, another important aspect of my life at the time was, and still is, the Rotary Clubs of Grand Cayman. And again, why I continue to dedicate myself to that organization, Madam Speaker, once we were able to get word out about the devastation that we suffered here in the Cayman Islands, the Rotary Clubs of Grand Cayman together raised, through Rotarians and Friends of Rotary around the world, over $2 million in cash, not to mention how much things in kind we got. And I was very happy that there was a couple of pages dedicated in the special in today's compass to it. And in fact, I smiled when the member from East End was speaking, because there's a picture in here with the Rotary Club in East End with a sign in saying that there were a project in East End. So, Madam Speaker, it was a fantastic to see not only the help, as I talked about, that we saw from the community and on the Chamber side locally, but also what the power of reaching out and the power of organizations such as Rotary can do in times of need. Madam Speaker, I also want to reflect back on the way the community was, the way the country were after the hurricane. And my mother would always tell me that the Lord will never give me anything more than I can handle. And Madam Speaker, we may have questioned that after the hurricane, and there were many days that we all probably thought we could not handle it. And the fact is that we did, and we rebound, and we showed resilience. But Madam Speaker, the Lord generally gives you these things to teach you a lesson. The Lord generally gives you these challenges to say to you that I am here, I am fair, I am forgiven, but I am a stern God. And Madam Speaker, I think that of many of the messages we heard today, that is the one lesson that we may all want to focus on and remember, that although it was a terrible event, the Lord gave us the ability and the strength to recover, and we should never forget that and continue to encompass that in our daily lives. Madam Speaker, last December, my message at Christmas was not to forget our neighbors, to remember our neighbors over the Christmas period to drop some food off for those who we think may need it, maybe a couple of gifts. And even though we're just a couple months away from December, again, Madam Speaker, perhaps this anniversary of Hurricane Ivan is a good time for us to remember that, as we heard when we had no water, we had no electricity, that there are many, many of our Caymanians out there today that are living in the conditions that we all lived in after Hurricane Ivan. There are many families out there without power and without water, and Madam Speaker, may I dare say, without food today. And so I would say to all of us in here, as I know we all do, but to the greater country at large, perhaps let us take the time during this anniversary, maybe over the weekend, to go out around our neighborhoods, go and visit our neighbors and check in on them and see who is in need and how we can help them. Thank you, Madam Speaker. May God bless this country.
Recognize the second elected member from the District of Georgetown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Mindful of the time, I shall be as brief as I can, but I thank you for the opportunity to reflect upon our country's reflection of the 10th anniversary of Hurricane Ivan. Madam Speaker, as I sat here and I've listened to the majority of members, my eyes have been moist because so much of what has been said, I could shake my head in reflection and say, yes, I experienced that, I remember it. And as we have talked and chatted and people reminisced, so much of the emotion and the pain and the utter sense of helplessness that we felt during Hurricane Ivan just comes flooding right back to us, and particularly to me. And I just remember that that is the one time in my life I have ever feared for my life. I heard the member from Northside reflect and talk about the sound of the wind. I described it as like a freight train with me sitting there right next to that railroad track, because not only was the wind howling, but my home was just simply shaking, like as if I was sitting right next to a rail track. And my utter sense of helplessness was compounded by a young daughter who kept screaming to me, "Dad, I am afraid. I'm scared." And I remember always doing the one thing and only thing I knew that I could do. And that was to embrace her and to pray. God spare us. The days following Ivan, I spent at the airport because I was chairman of Cayman Airways. I was able to help so many people get off this island. Helping, first of all, to board the sick, the infirm, the pregnant, women with young children, get them on those first flights out. And I remember loading baggage, unloading baggage, just helping. Secondly, helping staff of my office to get on a charter flight. I was fortunate enough that my two eldest children were off at university. I didn't have to worry. But I always remember as well the unity, the camaraderie, and the sense of togetherness that existed in those months following all of our efforts to try and clean up and get life back to normal for our citizens in this country. I was proud to have been able to play a minor role, but I know there are many hundreds of people in this country who stood up and helped and provided leadership in ways that are not recorded and will probably never be remembered. But to those of us that know, we are grateful for them and for all that we did. That time period in the months following Ivan, we were truly our brother's keeper. And as I reflect upon things today, my prayer for our country is that we might remember where we came from, where we are today, and give God thanks. Because when I reflect upon the devastation that beset us, we are truly fortunate people. And I have to say, God truly had his hand in protecting us as well. Let us remember, let us give thanks. But as I conclude, Madam Speaker, I don't want to detract from anything we're trying to do here today, but let's also remember too that today is the 13th anniversary of the 9/11 atrocities that afflicted our neighbor to the north. And we too were quite significantly affected by those events. And today, like it was back then, we hold our hands with them and reflect upon their hardships and the things that they experienced as well. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Recognize the fifth elected member from Georgetown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's just a bit hard coming behind everyone that spoke before, because a lot of the things that were said were relived in memories or stories of 10 years ago. Ivan the Terrible, that's what they called it. I think that it made so many people that were doubters, so many people that had heard the stories of the 1932 hurricane and couldn't put it into perspective, believers in that man upstairs, believers in higher powers than any man. I remember my own take on hurricanes before. Having gone through Gilbert and thinking that was the strongest thing I would ever experience in my lifetime. We used to laugh at hurricane days because you'd go out and party the night before, take the next day or two off. You might have to pick up a few pieces of debris, but that was it. And then I remember being stuck in a very low-lying area, having gone to assist and board up someone's house and getting stuck there when the curfew was put down and couldn't leave. And Madam Speaker, the night that I spent in that house, waist deep in water that I wouldn't even want to imagine what was in it, but not having any other place to go other than a countertop. And also being separated from my now wife, who was my then girlfriend of about 2 months. And it made me realize a lot of things. It made me realize that you never want to be apart from loved ones in those types of events, because thoughts can almost kill you. I remember the next day, Madam Speaker, when we emerged, and there was a lot of talk along the island, around the island, those people that you could get in contact with. Everyone was hearing that hundreds of people had perished and that various districts had gotten washed away and there were bodies in the streets, and and the sheer terror, and just thinking about that and feeling so insignificant. And I was glad that a lot of those reports were exaggerated, but you can understand in those types of moments, and when the graves were washing up and people were not knowing how to comprehend any of what was going on because we had never lived that, right? And it's those things, Madam Speaker, that I would hope that people who were here or not here, because we've heard both sides today, take into consideration, because it's a not knowing that almost gets you more than knowing. I remember, Madam Speaker, the outpouring though from the international community, because we've spoken a lot about, people in our own community helping. And I too, like the 6th elected member, I'm a Rotarian. I remember going out by boat and meeting supply boats, getting things that were sent overseas, and then distributing them. It was that moment as well where you understand where this little 100 square foot group of islands, square miles, sorry, group of islands, where our reach is, because there were a lot of people from all over the world wanting to assist, wanting to get here as quickly as possible. And I thank each and every person who recognized or unrecognized, because there were also people that wanted to help, that wanted to be anonymous. And I say 10 years later, we are very grateful for their support. We're grateful for their humanity. Ivan tested us, Madam Speaker, but it also made us stronger. But I think most importantly, it humbled us in the face and grace of God. Because if we couldn't stop and acknowledge a higher being, if we didn't see that man can build anything and in an instant it can be taken away by some force that he can't understand, then we're deaf, dumb, blind. Madam Speaker, I often joke with my parents-in-law now that Ivan was the defining moment in our relationship. You see, I had the only working car in 2 families. So all of a sudden, somebody that I joke they used to ignore at the dinner table because they were fearful of me courting their daughter, I became almost a son because they needed me. But that's an inside family joke. But what it did.
Make sure to tell Harry that this evening.
What it did, Madam Speaker, was show as well, though, that those of us that had something quickly shared it with others that had nothing. And at the same time, we got something that we could never exchange money for down the road. And I got a wife and a child out of it. So I'm forever grateful. Just for being a taxi. But Madam Speaker, today is a day of thanksgiving. We should continue to count our blessings and be grateful for our many mercies, because something like Ivan, having experienced that, will always show us that even in the most perilous of times, as human beings, with the grace of God, we have the ability to transcend those moments, even when we think it can't get any worse. And if we live to fight another day, we can see how far we can come from those types of moments. And I think that each year on September 11th, I would ask every single citizen of these islands to reflect on some of those lessons, to be a bit kinder to our neighbors, and to just remember that together we are stronger, and with the grace of God, we can accomplish all things. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the Honourable Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's good to hear that as far as the Councillor Connolly is concerned, out of evil come forth good. Managed to get a wife and a child. Madam Speaker, we can now smile 10 years on. But I too had my moments of despair. My son was 21 months old. My daughter was 9 months. And we had some terrifying moments. I recall in the midst of it all, I made a mistake of calling Mr. Colonel Gomez and said to him that my back door was breached and water was coming in, and I asked him what his views were. And he said, I'm sorry for you, that's a north sound coming in on you there. It was one of those responses that I could have done well without. He meant well at the time, of course, but the sheer shock and so. Well, Madam Speaker, to sum it up, I would sort of characterize what happened this way. I recall very well the anxiety, the anticipation, and the scramble at the onset when we heard it was coming. And we did, as a country, all that we could in mobilizing ourselves. And then we experienced the sheer shock of it, terror that came with that. And thereafter, it was the despair, the disbelief, the destruction. Thereafter, Madam Speaker, there was a sense of disbelief. What has happened to us? And then, as a country, we quickly realized that we had to get on with our lives. We had to find a way to rise above it. So we started mobilizing ourselves. There was the outpouring of goodwill, support, the scramble to ensure that there was business continuity plans in place, that government continued to function, that there was law and order. I recall, Madam Speaker, the clamoring for and the objection to state of emergency and the curfews. There were issues about breakdown in law and order, and how long we should keep curfews for, how long we should keep state of emergency in place. But all this, during all of this, we never lost sight of the fact that as a country, we need to find a way to put the pieces back together and get on with our lives. And as I think a couple of speakers before me have said, it is a real pity that so shortly after the hurricane and we landed on our feet, that the goodwill all seemed to have evaporated. But it is still within us as a people to get back to that stage and to move away from the current climate of the got you kind of environment that we now find ourselves in. We need to get away from that. And so, well, Madam Speaker, we could call what happened then a teachable moment in the life of the Cayman Islands. It was indeed a teachable moment. It's one of those that we hope we don't have to experience again. And certainly join with those who recognize that we need, like our neighbors in the north, we need to give God thanks that we have again landed on our feet, and are moving full steam ahead as a country, as a people. And in all of this, we need to continue to invoke the blessings of God Almighty. Thank you.
Recognize the Honourable Deputy Governor, Acting Deputy Governor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I also understand that I'm the last speaker right before lunch, so I will try to be brief. As acting head of the civil service, I think it warranted that I do say a few words in remembrance of the actions, in thanks of those civil service, but not only the civil servants, but also the public servants and the employees of our government-owned companies, our government-owned company. I was a police sergeant at the time of Hurricane Ivan 10 years ago. And as many speakers have said before me, none of us really knew what to expect. And I would believe that true even up to the passing of the hurricane, of the storm. In fact, I remembered yesterday as I was thinking and viewing all of the media that was going on. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning during the passing of the storm. And I was staying at my father's house in Crew Road because my family and I had moved closer to Georgetown so I could get to work at 7 o'clock in the morning. I called my inspector at the time and said, "Sir, I'm not able to make it because a roof just landed on my car, so I'm going to have to find another way in." It still never hit me of what was happening, so I was still expecting to report into work. After the passing, what I observed, not just in the police force, but for the entire civil service, was truly amazing. Because whilst the storm impacted all of us in an individual way, what I saw, Madam Speaker, was the unique coming together as a service for the betterment of the Cayman Islands. We regrouped as an entire entity. We assessed as a single unit, and we deployed appropriately to get the Cayman Islands back on track. Through Cayman Airways, through the police force, through the immigration department, through the planning, all departments within the government, we all had that single purpose of getting Cayman back on track. And I think that's what Minister Tibbetts was referring to when he says he wished we could get back to some aspects of our response to Hurricane Ivan, because we didn't allow, collectively, we didn't allow the pettiness to get in the way of what was truly important. So with that, Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank all civil servants and public officials for their efforts in our recovery. The lessons we've learned, as the Honourable Premier stated, we've created Hazard Management Cayman Islands. We have legislation in place now that requires all civil service entities to have continuity of operation plans, which are reviewed annually. We have annual exercises to test those plans. We have the Doppler radar to better inform us of what weather issues are coming our way and to hopefully better record wind speeds. And of course, the continued education program for our community, as some parts of our community we're a transient community. We also need to remember that we need to teach new individuals, and I think as a civil service we do a great job in doing that. With that, Madam Speaker, thank you.
I'd like to thank all honourable members for availing themselves to this opportunity to reflect and recall the members of Hurricane Ivan as we are now on the anniversary of it. I also welcome the intimation that perhaps Honourable Premier may be making a declaration to that effect. I believe I understood correctly as to the direction the government will wish to give thankfulness infinitum in the years to come, and I believe that would be most appropriate whenever that is shared with the public. Just from a personal perspective, Ivan started for me on a CPA visit to Canada with the Honourable Linford Pearson and the former Clerk of the House in Quebec. And most of you that know me would quite readily recognize that I'm an avid weather person, and from the time they roll off Africa or roll off South America, I'm pretty much keeping a keen eye. And lest we forget, the projection was that Hurricane Ivan was headed for the island of Cayman Brac. It wasn't until the last minute, as it were, that it changed its course. And I remember saying to Mr. Pearson and Wendy that I was heading back south and cut my CPA conference short. I arrived in Tampa only to be told by Cayman Airways the flight was full. I couldn't get a seat, never mind you were a director and a legal advisor to them at the time. And I was able to get a one-way ticket on Southwest into Fort Lauderdale, being landed as the last flight there, not knowing that a hurricane had made up Hurricane Flora in Bahamas, and I actually was running to the back for a hurricane and ended up spending 3 days in Fort Lauderdale because we couldn't get to Miami Airport because of the hurricane that came there. Eventually I got to Grand Cayman on the Thursday. I went to see the governor and reaffirmed what I told all governors, that any weather over 40 miles per hour, regardless whether I was in cabinet or not, I'd be heading 90 miles to the northeast, and just to make that way clear. And I never forget the little security at the old glass house saying, "You must be a mad woman." I won't call his name. "You're heading into the storm and everybody's seeking shelter." And I said, yes, you know, we do have a bluff and we do serve a God. And my only concern then, because there was very few houses on the bluff at the time, was how I was going to get to Foster's and collect all the goods that I needed to house the many persons. And if I remember serves me right, we had 8 or 9 persons on my property for Ivan at that particular time, all ages, all physical conditions. And thank God for Cayman Airways, the national airline. They allowed me to take 17 boxes of goods to the BRAC in preparation. And as the 5th elected member from Georgetown said, I too had members in my constituents that threw hurricane parties, and there were some 44 of them from what we call Dallastown, who went to what traditionally we sheltered it on a BRAC, the cave at Watching Place. One was Granny Cave and one was an unnamed cave. And when I had spoke to, and I refer to him as Kent, those of you who here know who I'm talking about, he didn't study the weather, but I tell you he's pretty good at his predictions. And when we spoke to him, and also the late Captain Lawford Tatum, they were very much convinced that it was not going to hit Cayman Brac long before the officials got the word out. And we then started making preparation. The first elected member from Cayman Brac and myself, we were both had Infinitive, the Cayman Airways. If I remember correctly, we were both board members at the time, and we wish to put on record our heartfelt thanks and gratitude to late Mr. Lyndon Tibbetts, as we called him up in Tampa, and he graciously sent lots and lots of supplies down. At the time, we did not have the privilege of having our own satellite phones as is distributed now to members. And I remember after going through all of listening to the hurricane and trying to help staff members, and Kirky coming on and saying, listen, we can't send back out the fire truck because we just had an 8-foot wave come down the runway. And that was difficult, you know. I remember Christine Maltman calling with the water coming up to the first floor of our house and the gas being smelt, and all the horrible stories and stories of my own house stopped going. And some of this you may not realize, but there are a lot of Cayman Brackers in Cayman, and a lot of them happened to be at my house at the time. And as the reports came in about their children, we literally had a mother that fainted in my kitchen when she heard that her sunroof roof had blown off. And it was one of those things that we were forced to come to that focal point that we as Caymanians can come together and rally around, but not just as Caymanians, because I use that very wide, the persons who come and live and have their being in here. I remember as I got to Kim Wellis to ask the manager, former manager, if I could use her satellite phone to call a former client of mine from my other life, as it were. And I spoke to Mr. Hughes. He was flying from Houston to Stuart, Florida. And at the time, he said he had 8 members of his staff with him. And he asked if I could give a list of what we needed for hurricane supplies. And of course, I rattled off because that's my life. I love weather. And he just asked one thing, if we could waive the landing fees and refuel him when he came. And I had lost contact with Grand Cayman, so I took an executive decision that yes, we would do that. Luckily those days we could do those things to save persons' lives. And he landed, and he sent his team basically to do an assessment, because the first elected member and I, we pretty much decided since we were spared, we would store up the things at the airport, Cayman back, and then have a quick transfer to Grand Cayman once the airport was there. And then we hit another problem. As we spoke to the head of civil aviation, we realized that their clearance from Grand Cayman wasn't there. We didn't have the proper radio channels, and he didn't have a cell phone, believe that or not, at that time. So I bought a cell phone from Cayman Wireless, gave it to him. The first plane was landed on Cayman Bar, was landed using a cell phone with the help of our brothers and sisters in Jamaica to get it landed. And it was the happiest news of my air, and I'm sure the first elected members' air, when we heard back from Richie that they had walked the airstrip in Grand Cayman, and we felt that the express, which we had sent down to Central America, was able to come back in. I remember being on the first flight in, and even though I had heard the stories and the cries, I could not wrap my mind around the magnitude of the damage that had actually happened in Grand Cayman. And as I flew over Easton, I just could not contain the state of emotion and the tears that just flew as I saw the colossal devastation from Easton right into Georgetown. And of course, I wanted to hit to Easton as I hit there because I had family members and friends, but you couldn't get through Town for the sand and everything. And my brother was able to send down a couple of his construction workers to try to help my house, because I had asked Darrell in my haste to get to Cayman back and throwing down everything to put up the 17 sheets of plywood in my house. And of course, they called and said that Mark Scotland, former minister, wanted to find out if he could get a sheet of the plywood to help an old person in Bontown. Of course, I said yes. Well, as fate would have it, that was the door that flew open in my house and caused a third of my roof to go. And I said that just to say this, that the door that actually went was to my library. And another thing that those of you who know me would know, that I'm an avid book reader, and I saved everything from primary school on up. But one of my most precious treasures were my 6 years of law school notes and books that were in the library. And here I was worrying about, what is going to happen to them? How can I restore that? And for those of you that still not quite sure whether there's a God, let me tell you that there is, because when I did eventually get home the next day, because I came in, I had to go straight to Exco, which was at Appleton's at the time, a few Moses, and Dinwiddie, I believe, was the governor. The first thing I did was to look into my library, and I kid you not, you can go to my library now in the Brat, not one single one of those books in the room, which was the door that blew off and the roof that went off, even got wet. How it happened, there's no real explanation, but it did happen. And I wish to give credence and public acknowledgement that indeed he have founded us upon a rock. And it gives me great pleasure to hear members of Parliament today stand up, official and elected members, and reflect, and a common thread expressed or implicitly was how Almighty God was able to come through. And because he has no geographical or sociological or financial barriers, Minister Tara Rivers and Minister Archer, although they were not an island, they still had that steadfast anchor in knowing that all would be well if we put our trust and faith with him. And before I put my other hat on of preaching, let me just sincerely express my gratitude, because what you may not have taken the time to appreciate was that all of what has been said here today has been recorded in our Hansards. And I would ask Madam Clerk if she would graciously offer them to the archives, so that in years to come, that we would have a purely non-political presentation of what members felt at the time. And just for those who prepare, an element that we ought to include is those Caymanians who are outside of the jurisdiction during national disasters, to ensure that whether it's our London office or our Washington office or Hong Kong or wherever we may have offices, that even if we close to the media for whatever reason, we get information out to them as soon as possible, because they served as very necessary suppliers of goods that came in. Churches from Florida, everyone that had a contact with a Caymanian made sure that we were well taken care of. And the other aspect would be for those of us who come in from the Bright. Now it's the Honorable Deputy Premier, myself, but in years to come there'll be others, that it's not forgotten in the bigger scheme of things, because I remember the first night coming in, I didn't even have time to think that I needed a pass for curfew, and it wasn't until the meeting had finished late into the night, and it was in the darkness, and here I was with 3 Jamaican construction workers that I didn't know that my brothers loaned to me to fix my roof. My sister, my son who had flown in, just parked out in the middle of Appleby wondering, well, where am I going to go tonight? Like the fourth elected member from Town, the street signs weren't there. He wasn't quite sure where it was going. There was rumors of looting. Of course, I was a woman. We don't carry guns in Cayman, or Cayman Brat for that matter, legally anyway. And it was not a good feeling. And I really thank God, though, for that opportunity, because it humbled me to a place to realize that there were perhaps thousands of our immigrant workers here in a similar type of frame of mind. Where do we turn? So as we plan and move forward, if we would address our mind to some of those things that may slip by the way. And I also wish to go on record of thanking Honorable Chief Justice, who, after 2 months of going up and down to East End and trying to keep the country alive, and my family having sent 5 generators, all of which were stolen at the airport. He passed one night and saw that I was in darkness and came and graciously volunteered a generator for me to use, because for the first couple of weeks I literally stayed in my vehicle, and that's after having taken in my ex-husband, some tourists that I met at Kentucky Fried Chicken who had just got here to the island honeymooning, and I bought some tickets, took them to the BRAC because they were staying in the apartments across from Kentucky, never knew where to go, could not get out of the island. I never knew whether they were missionaries or murderers. We just took them in. That's Deputy Premier Cayman Kind, I suppose, in operation. And also Miss Cassie's son, who was staying in Mr. Bigg's apartment. She called because it had washed away and took him in. And they were all different personalities within the house that normally we would not want on any given day. But it shows that when we go through a struggle, we don't look at the outward appearances. All of those barriers that hinder us in our daily walk are neutralized by the power of the one who made the universe. And I would hope that as we go forward, as we debate, as we evolve, as we mature as a democracy, that we would be able to say, hitherto the Lord have brought us. I thank you for allowing me this opportunity to share my own experiences as I've listened to yours. Madam Clerk, if we could move on to the next item of business.
Presentation of papers and reports. The Port Authority of the Cayman Islands financial statements, year ended 30th of June 2013, to be laid on the table by the Honorable Minister of District Administration, Tourism and Transport.
I recognize the Honorable Minister for District Admin, the Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this honorable House the financial statements year ended June 30th, 2013 for the Port Authority of the Cayman Islands.
So ordered. Does the Honorable Deputy Premier wish to speak to it?
Madam Speaker, just to invite all honorable members to have a look at it for themselves. Thank you.
Information and Communication Technology Authority financial statements, year ended 30th of June 2013, to be laid on the table by the Honorable Minister of Planning, Land, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure.
Recognize the Honorable Minister responsible for planning.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I, with your permission, beg to lay on the table the financial statements for the Information and Communications Technology Authority for the year ending June 30th, 2013. And let me just say, Madam Speaker, there are 2 more statements which I am going to lay, and I will have no speech to make about them. I would just ask for members to have their own read, as they're all self-explanatory. Thank you.
Thank you. So ordered.
The National Housing Development Trust financial statements, 30th of June 2012, to be laid by the Honourable Minister of Planning, Lands, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure.
Honourable Minister of Planning.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the financial statements of the National Housing Development Trust for the year ending June 30th, 2012.
So ordered. Madam Clerk.
The Electricity Regulatory Authority financial statements ended 30th of June 2013 to be laid by the Honourable Minister of Planning, Land, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure.
Honourable Minister of Planning.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The third one, which I beg to lay, is the financial statements for the Electricity Regulatory Authority for year ending June 30th, 2013.
Thank you. So ordered.
Annual Report of the Oversights Committee of the Office of the Complaints Commissioner, 2013-2014, to be laid on the table by the Chairman of the Overseas Committee of the Office of the Complaints Commissioner, the elected member for Northside.
Oversight. I recognize the Honourable Member from Northside who will deal with the Oversight Committee report.
Madam Speaker, I take great pleasure, joy in laying the annual report of the Oversight Committee of the Office of the Complaints Commissioner 2013-2014.
So ordered. Does the Honourable Member wish to speak to it?
Just briefly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I invite all members, especially the members on the government bench, to read the report in its entirety, and in particular, the minutes attached to the report. They will find therein the proof to absolve me as chairman of the committee, who they so willingly and enthusiastically vilified in the meeting in Cayman, because I did what the committee asked me to do. Move a motion to debate the whistle-blowing report. The minutes will clearly show that my moving of that motion as chairman was fully authorized, supported, and instructed by the committee so to do. The minutes clearly record who moved the motion, who seconded the motion, and who voted on the motion to have the chairman move a motion in accordance with standing orders to have the whistleblower motion debated. So, Madam Speaker, I hope, I even pray, that they will take the opportunity to see that I am not the troublemaker nor the villain that they like to paint me when I do what I am asked to do in accordance with the rules of standing orders, which allow us to function in this House so much better when they are followed and not ignored. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Report of the Standing Business Committee, the sixth meeting of the 2013-2014 session of the Legislative Assembly, held in Cayman, to be laid on the table by the Premier, the Honourable Minister of Home and Community Affairs, Chairman of the Standing Business Committee.
Recognize the Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the report of the Standing Business Committee for the 6th meeting of the 2013-2014 session of the Legislative Assembly held in Cayman.
So ordered. Does the Honourable Premier wish to speak to it?
No, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Report of the Standing Business Committee for the throne speech and budget address, first meeting of the 2014-2015 session of the Legislative Assembly, to be laid on the table by the Premier, the Honourable Minister of Home and Community Affairs, Chairman of the Standing Business Committee.
I recognize the Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the report of the Standing Business Committee on the throne speech and budget address, first meeting of the 2014-2015 session of the Legislative Assembly.
So ordered. Does the Honourable Premier wish to speak thereon?
No, thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Before you take your seat, Honourable Premier, may I invite you to move the suspension of Standing Order 23, 7 and 8 so that we can entertain questions beyond the hour of 11 a.m. I'm actually going to lunch after I suspend in the event that Honourable Premier may not be able to come in at the beginning thereafter.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 23,
7 and 8.
7 and 8 in order that questions may be taken after the 10 o'clock hour, the 11 o'clock hour.
Thank you. The question is that Standing Order 23, 7 and 8 be suspended to allow questions to be entertained after the hour of 11 a.m. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. I believe the ayes have it. Accordingly, Standing Order 23, 7 and 8 are suspended. We'll now break. Honourable Premier.
Madam Speaker, as you indicated, I may not be back in at the precise hour because I have another meeting. And with your indulgence, I'd like to move the suspension of Standing Order 14.3 so that notwithstanding the fact that today is Thursday and private members motion day, that government business is allowed to take precedence over the private members' motions. Madam Speaker, I should just explain quickly to all members of the House that the government wishes to deal with the 3 bills which we believe will be dealt with swiftly, and the government motion, and complete the government business, and then the balance of this meeting of the Legislative Assembly can be devoted to the 10 private members' motions that we have, rather than having a break in between.
The question is that Standing Order 14.3 be suspended to allow the government business to take precedence over private members' business. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. I believe the ayes have it. Standing Order 14.3 is hereby suspended. We'll now take the luncheon break and reconvene at 2:15 p.m.